when evil was allowed to continue, and the years nobody stopped them. 6 crimes that should have ended sooner. Ariel Castro, Cleveland kidnappings, 2002 to 2013, United States. For more than a decade, evil lived quietly on Seymour Avenue. From the outside, Ariel Castro's house appeared unremarkable. Peeling paint, drawn curtains, nothing that demanded attention. But inside, 3 young women were being held captive, hidden in plain sight. Between 2002 and 2004, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus disappeared after accepting rides or help from a man they believed they could trust. Their cases were investigated separately. As years passed without answers, public attention slowly faded. Meanwhile, inside Castro's home, the crime continued. For 11 years, these women were confined, restrained, and isolated from the outside world. Neighbors occasionally reported loud music or disturbances, but nothing that prompted sustained investigation. Castro himself was questioned by police during the search for Amanda Berry, one of the women he kidnapped, yet no charges followed. He remained free, living openly in the same community, where the victims were being searched for. Amanda Berry became pregnant while in captivity. She gave birth to a daughter in 2006. The child was fathered by Ariel Castro. The girl was 6 years old at the time of the escape in May 2013. Berry raised her daughter inside the house, under captivity conditions. The escape that ended the Ariel Castro case. On May 6, 2013, Amanda Berry escaped from Ariel Castro's house after nearly 11 years in captivity. That morning, Castro left the house, locking the main door behind him as usual. However, he failed to fully secure an interior door, leading to the front of the house. Berry noticed the mistake. She was unable to open the door completely. Berry began kicking and forcing it, creating a small opening. She started screaming for help through the gap. A neighbor, named Charles Ramsey, heard the screams and approached the house. Berry told him she and her child were being held captive. Ramsey helped her kick the door open further. Once she got outside, Berry called 911 using Ramsey's phone. During the call, Berry identified herself as a missing person and stated that she had been abducted years earlier. Police arrived within minutes. Discovery inside the house. When officers entered the residence on Seymour Avenue, they found Michelle Knight, missing since 2002, Amanda Berry, missing since 2003, Gina De Jesus, missing since 2004. The women were found alive, but had been living under extreme confinement. Rooms were secured with locks and chains. Windows were boarded or blocked. The victims had limited access to the outside world and were controlled through intimidation and isolation. Arrest of Ariel Castro. Ariel Castro returned to the area later that day and was arrested without incident. The key facts that shocked investigators is that Castro had been questioned by police during the Amanda Berry investigation. He lived openly in the neighborhood throughout the captivity. He hosted gatherings and was known to neighbors, and no one suspected the scale of the crimes occurring inside the house. Aftermath. In August 2013, Castro pleaded guilty to 937 counts, including kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder for forced miscarriages. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole plus 1,000 years. September 3, 2013. Ariel Castro was found dead in his prison cell. His death was ruled a suicide. Jimmy Savile. Decades of abuse hidden in plain sight, from 1960s to 2000s, United Kingdom. For more than 40 years, Jimmy Savile was one of the most recognizable faces in British television. He was a popular radio DJ, the host of Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It, a charity fundraiser, and a self-styled eccentric known for cigars, tracksuits, and catchphrases. He socialized with politicians, royalty, hospital administrators, and senior figures at the BBC. Behind that public image, Savile was a serial sexual predator. From the early 1960s until the late 2000s, Savile sexually abused hundreds of victims, many of them children. Some were as young as 8 years old. The abuse took place across multiple settings. television studios, hospitals, schools, care homes, and private residences. For decades, the crimes went unpunished. How the abuse continued undetected. Jimmy used his celebrity and institutional access as protection. At the BBC, he was given unsupervised access to young fans and child performers. On Jimmy'll Fix It, children were encouraged to meet him backstage, often alone. Several former BBC staff later stated they were aware of inappropriate behavior, but felt unable or unwilling to challenge a figure with Savile's influence. Jimmy also held volunteer roles in hospitals, including Leeds General Infirmary and Stoke Mandeville Hospital. These positions granted him access to vulnerable patients, including children with disabilities and individuals in long-term care. Abuse occurred in hospital wards, examination rooms, and even morgues. Complaints were made over the years. Victims reported abuse to police, parents raised concerns. Journalists heard rumors, and colleagues witnessed disturbing behavior. But investigations were dropped, evidence was ignored, or allegations were dismissed as rumors. Jimmy's status as a national figure and a prolific charity fundraiser shielded him from scrutiny. Death before exposure. Jimmy Savile died on October 29, 2011, at the age of 84. At the time of his death, he was publicly celebrated. Tributes aired on television. Streets and buildings were named in his honor. But 1 year later, everything changed. In 2012, an ITV documentary titled Exposure: The Other Side of Jimmy Savile aired. Survivors came forward in large numbers, describing abuse that spanned decades and institutions. The scale was unprecedented. Subsequent investigations by police and independent inquiries concluded Savile had abused at least 450 victims. This abuse occurred over 4 decades. Institutions repeatedly failed to act on warnings. Scotland Yard described him as one of the most prolific sexual offenders in British history. Institutional failure. The scandal did not stop with Savile. Investigations revealed systemic failures at BBC, National Health Service, NHS, hospitals, police departments, and charitable organizations. Fear of reputational damage, deference to celebrity, and lack of victim-centered reporting allowed Jimmy's crimes to continue unchecked. Because Jimmy died before prosecution, he was never charged or convicted. For many survivors, justice came only in acknowledgement, not accountability. Why these crimes went uncovered for so long? Jimmy's case exposed a chilling truth. His crimes were not hidden because there was no evidence. They were hidden because no one wanted to see them. He operated in public spaces surrounded by adults, protected by institutions that valued reputation over responsibility. Jimmy Savile's legacy. Today, Jimmy Savile's name is no longer associated with entertainment or charity. It is associated with one of the largest posthumous criminal revelations in modern British history, and a warning about what happens when power, fame, and silence intersect. Josef Fritzl, the Cellar Prison, 1984 to 2008, Austria. For 24 years, a crime unfolded beneath an ordinary family home in the town of Amstetten, Austria. Above ground, Josef Fritzl was known as a retired electrical engineer, a strict but unremarkable patriarch. Below his house, hidden behind reinforced doors and concrete walls, he held his own daughter captive. The crime began in August 1984. The abduction. Fritzl lured his 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, into the basement of the family home under the pretense of helping him carry a door. That door led to a purpose-built underground cell. Elizabeth never came back upstairs. Fritzl told the family and later the police that Elizabeth had run away to join a religious cult. He produced a letter to support the claim. The explanation was suspicious but accepted. No sustained investigation followed. Life underground. From 1984 to 2008, Elizabeth was held in a windowless cellar, measuring roughly 35 square meters. The space had no natural light and minimal ventilation. Fritzl controlled electricity, food, and movement. Over the years, he repeatedly raped her. As a result, Elizabeth gave birth to 8 children. 3 children were kept imprisoned underground with her, while 3 children were taken upstairs and raised by Fritzl and his wife, Rosemary, who was told the babies had been abandoned by Elizabeth. One child died shortly after birth, and was cremated by Fritzl. The children underground never saw sunlight. Some did not know grass, trees, or the sky existed. Control and concealment. Fritzl meticulously avoided detection. He reinforced doors with electronic locks. He expanded the cellar gradually over decades. He monitored Elizabeth's compliance through threats and portrayed himself publicly as a concerned, abandoned father. Doctors, social services, and neighbors interacted with the household over the years. Multiple children appeared suddenly with vague explanations. No one connected the dots. The discovery. One of the children raised in captivity, Kirsten, became critically ill. Fritzl allowed her to be taken to a hospital for the first time. Doctors were alarmed by her condition and demanded to see her mother. Fritzl went back home and brought back Elizabeth to the hospital. There, after 24 years underground, she spoke to police. Within hours, authorities searched the Amstetten house. They discovered the hidden cellar, the locked rooms, and the remaining children still imprisoned below. Arrest and trial. Josef Fritzl was arrested in April 2008. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to incest, rape, kidnapping, enslavement, and murder by negligence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and committed to a secure psychiatric facility, having been diagnosed with a severe personality disorder. Aftermath. Elizabeth and her children were relocated to a protected location. Their identities were sealed. Austria enacted stronger privacy laws as a direct result of the case. The Fritzl case became one of the most disturbing examples of long-term familial captivity ever documented, and a stark illustration of how extreme abuse can exist undetected within a normal residential setting. Marc Dutroux. Belgium's House of Secrets, 1990s, Belgium. In the mid-1990s, Belgium was forced to confront a crime that revealed not only extreme violence, but a collapse of public trust in the institutions meant to stop it. Marc Dutroux was not a shadowy criminal hiding from society. He was a known offender, previously convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault. Yet despite this history, he was released early and went on to commit crimes that would shock the nation. Background and early warnings. Dutroux had a long criminal record before the crimes for which he became infamous. In the 1980s, he was convicted of abducting and raping young girls and sentenced to prison. He was released early in 1992, despite psychiatric warnings that he posed a serious danger. Within years, the worst fears became reality. The abductions. Between 1995 and 1996, several young girls disappeared in Belgium. Among the victims were Julie Lejeune, 8 years old, Melissa Rousseau, 8 years old, and Marcel, 17 years old, and Yves Lambrecht, 19 years old. Dutroux abducted the girls and held them in concealed basement cells, beneath properties he owned. The cells were deliberately hidden, soundproofed, and locked. The victims were subjected to sexual abuse, starvation, and extreme neglect. Crimes hidden in plain sight. What makes the Dutroux case especially disturbing is how close authorities came, but yet failed to saving lives. In 1996, police searched Dutroux's house while 2 girls were still alive in a hidden cellar. Officers did not discover the concealed space and left. The girls died shortly afterward. Later investigations confirmed they could have been rescued. Arrest and discovery. In August 1996, Laetitia Delhaize, who was 14 years old, was abducted by Marc Dutroux after he offered her a ride in Belgium. Shortly after the abduction, Dutroux stopped the car at a traffic light. In that moment, Laetitia made a split-second decision. She opened the car door and jumped out while the vehicle was still moving. Despite being disoriented and terrified, she ran to nearby houses and screamed for help. Local residents intervened and contacted the police. Because of her escape, police were alerted immediately. Dutroux was identified, his vehicle was traced, and a search of his properties followed. This escape directly led to Dutroux's arrest and the discovery of other victims. Dutroux was arrested in August 1996 following the kidnapping of 2 teenage girls. One of them, Sabine Dardenne, survived and later testified in court. A second victim, Laetitia Delhaize, who also survived after escaping and alerting authorities. The bodies of Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau were later found buried. The remains of Marcel and Yves Lambrecht were discovered months later. The network question. Dutroux claimed he was part of a larger pedophile network, supplying victims to powerful individuals, while some accomplices were identified. Most notably Michelle Martin, his wife. Claims of a vast elite network were never legally proven. However, evidence of obstruction, negligence, and rivalry between police forces was undeniable. Key files were lost. Leads were ignored. Jurisdictions failed to cooperate. Public confidence collapsed. National outrage. In October 1996, more than 300,000 people marched in Brussels, in what became known as the White March, demanding justice, transparency, and reform. It was one of the largest protests in Belgian history. Trial and sentence. After years of delays, Dutroux was tried in 2004. He was convicted of kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder. Marc Dutroux was sentenced to life imprisonment. His wife, Michelle Martin, was convicted as an accomplice for knowingly allowing children to starve while Dutroux was away. Robert Pickton. The Pig Farm Murders, from 1980s to 2000s, Canada. For years, women disappeared from Vancouver's downtown east side, one of the city's poorest and most marginalized neighborhoods. They were mostly Indigenous women, sex workers, or women struggling with addiction. Many were reported missing. Few cases were treated as urgent. Behind those disappearances was Robert William Pickton, a pig farmer living quietly on a rural property in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. Early warnings ignored. Pickton was not unknown to police. In 1997, a woman escaped from his farm after being stabbed and handcuffed. She survived and identified Pickton as her attacker. He was charged with attempted murder. The charges were later dropped due to alleged evidentiary issues. Pickton walked free and the disappearances continued. The murders. From the early 1980s through the early 2000s, Pickton murdered women and brought their bodies to his pig farm. Prosecutors later alleged that Pickton lured victims to his property, killed them inside a slaughterhouse, and dismembered the bodies. Some remains were buried on the property, burned, or fed to pigs. DNA evidence later linked victims to meat processed on the farm, raising the horrifying possibility that human remains entered the food chain, though the full extent could never be determined. Pickton himself reportedly bragged to an undercover officer that he had killed 49 women and wanted to make it an even 50. Police investigation and discovery. In 2002, police finally obtained a search warrant, not initially for murder, but for illegal firearms. What they found transformed the case. Forensic teams uncovered human remains scattered across the farm, personal belongings of missing women, and DNA evidence linking Pickton to multiple victims. This property became one of the largest crime scenes in Canadian history. It was searched over months at enormous cost. Victims. Pickton was ultimately charged with 27 counts of murder. In 2007, he was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 25 years. Additional charges were stayed to spare families the trauma of repeated trials, though the court acknowledged evidence pointing to many more victims. Larry Nassar. Abuse under the guise of medicine, from 1990s to 2016, United States. For more than 2 decades, Larry Nassar was trusted with the bodies of America's most elite young athletes. He was a licensed osteopathic physician, the longtime team doctor for USA Gymnastics, and a respected medical professional at Michigan State University. Parents trusted him. Coaches deferred to him. Institutions defended him. Behind closed doors, Nassar was committing systematic sexual abuse, often in front of others, and often disguised as legitimate medical treatment. The abuse. From the early 1990s through 2016, Nassar sexually abused hundreds of girls and young women, many of them minors. Some victims were as young as 6 years old. The abuse occurred during what Nassar claimed were medical procedures, including treatments he described as pelvic manipulation or muscle therapy. But in reality, these acts had no medical basis. The assaults often happened in exam rooms, at training camps, at competitions, and in Nassar's home. Parents, trainers, or staff were sometimes present, but unaware that abuse was occurring because Nassar framed his actions as clinical and necessary. Warnings ignored. Complaints against Nassar were made years before his arrest. Athletes reported discomfort and abuse to coaches and administrators. Concerns were raised at Michigan State University, and USA Gymnastics was alerted multiple times. In 2015, gymnasts formally reported Nassar to USA Gymnastics, which delayed notifying law enforcement. When the FBI became involved, their investigation stalled for more than a year. During that delay, Nassar continued abusing victims. Exposure and arrest. In 2016, investigative reporting by the Indianapolis Star exposed widespread abuse within USA Gymnastics and reignited scrutiny of Nassar. Later that same year, police searched his home and found thousands of images and videos of child sexual abuse. Nassar was arrested in November 2016. Trials and sentencing. In 2017 and 2018, Nassar pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including sexual assault and possession of child sexual abuse material. In total, he received sentences amounting to 40 to 175 years in prison, effectively ensuring he would never be released. During sentencing, more than 150 survivors gave victim impact statements in open court, one of the largest public reckonings of sexual abuse in U.S. history. Institutional accountability. This scandal extended far beyond Nassar himself. Investigations found systemic failures at USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, and the FBI. Senior officials resigned. Civil lawsuits resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements to survivors. The case prompted widespread reforms in athlete safeguarding and reporting requirements. When crimes hide in plain sight, across different countries, decades, and social systems, these 6 crimes shared a common truth. They were not uncovered because they were well hidden. They endured because they were allowed to. Ariel Castro's victims were held in a residential neighborhood, while police searches faded with time. Jimmy Savile abused hundreds while institutions protected his reputation. Josef Fritzl built a prison beneath his own home and was believed without question. Marc Dutroux was known to authorities and still left free to kill. Robert Pickton targeted women whose disappearances were not treated as urgent. Larry Nassar abused athletes under the cover of medical authority, despite repeated warnings. In every case, the failure was not a lack of evidence. It was a lack of action. The question these cases leave behind is not how could this happen. It is how many times did it almost stop and did not. Follow us at Winnefogit for more true stories.